The listing said former pharmaceutical research station, but Frank Holloway knew a military bunker when he saw one. The reinforced walls, the blast-rated doors, the way the whole structure sat half-buried in the red mesa like someone wanted to hide it from orbital surveillance. He bought it anyway. 58 years old. 30 years in the Terran Colonial Defense Force. 847 confirmed kills across 12 worlds. Frank had enough nightmares to fill a lifetime. What was one more strange building on a frontier planet nobody cared about? Dustfall was the kind of world empires forgot. Humans and Silurians lived here side by side, scratching out lives in the rust-colored dust. No strategic value, no rare minerals. Just a quiet place at the edge of known space where a man could disappear. The seller was a Silurian bureaucrat named Pel Orvin. He had the nervous energy of someone trying too hard to seem calm. His scales were pale green, almost yellow at the edges, and his vertical pupils never quite met Frank's eyes. Excellent property, Orvin said for the third time. Very private. The previous owners left in a hurry. Business troubles. Frank signed the papers without asking questions. Questions led to conversations. Conversations led to connections. He wanted neither. The facility sprawled underground across 3 levels. Most of the equipment had been stripped out, leaving empty rooms with bolted-down tables and strange stains on the floors. The air recyclers hummed with a sound that reminded Frank of field hospitals. That same sterile, chemical smell that never quite covered what lay beneath. He set up his cot in what must have been an office on the upper level. Sparse. Functional. A soldier's quarters. On his second day, a young Silurian female appeared at his entrance. She was shorter than most of her kind, with dark green scales and oil-stained hands that marked her as a mechanic. "You are the human who bought the Death House," she said. Not a question. Frank leaned against the doorframe. "Death House. My name is Nira. My uncle worked security here 15 years ago. He never spoke about what happened inside. Not once. But he would wake up screaming 3 times a week until the day he died." She tilted her head, studying Frank with those unsettling reptilian eyes. "You should not live here." Noted. "You do not care." Frank almost smiled. "I've seen death, kid. I've caused plenty of it. Whatever ghosts are in this building, they'll have to get in line." Nira stared at him for a long moment. Then she turned and walked away without another word. That night, Frank lay on his cot listening to the facility settle around him. Old buildings made noise. Pipes contracted. Metal stressed and relaxed with temperature changes. He knew these sounds. The soft hiss of a pressurized door unsealing was not one of them. He was on his feet instantly, sidearm in hand. The sound had come from below. The lowest level, which he had not yet explored. The stairs down there had been blocked by heavy crates that he had planned to move eventually. The crates had moved themselves. Frank descended slowly, weapon raised, every sense alert. The stairwell lights flickered on automatically, casting harsh white light on concrete walls. At the bottom, a door stood open. A door that had definitely been sealed shut yesterday. Beyond it lay a room filled with storage drives. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, stacked on metal shelves like bricks in a warehouse. Dust covered everything except for a single terminal in the center of the room. Its screen glowed faint blue. Waiting, Frank holstered his weapon and approached the terminal. The screen displayed a simple prompt. Enter authorization code. He did not have a code. But he had 30 years of military experience, and he recognized the encryption format. This was not pharmaceutical security. This was military grade. Intelligence grade. Someone had hidden something here. Something important enough to protect with the same encryption used for war plans and assassination orders. Frank pulled up a chair and sat down. He had time. He had patience. And for the first time since leaving the service, he had something that felt like purpose. Whatever secrets this facility held, he would find them. He began to work. Outside, the twin moons of Dustfall rose over the mesa. In the settlement of Red Basin, Nira lay awake in her small apartment, thinking about the strange human who had moved into the place where her uncle lost his mind. And in orbit, far above the clouds, a monitoring system that had been dormant for 15 years registered a new access attempt on a forgotten server. An automated alert traveled through secure channels, bouncing across relay stations until it reached a desk in a building with no name on a world with no public records. Someone read the alert. Someone made a call. and a ship that had been waiting for exactly this moment began its descent toward Dustfall. The files should have stayed buried, but Frank Holloway had never been good at leaving things alone. 7 days of failed attempts taught Frank that patience alone would not crack this encryption. He needed help from someone he had hoped never to contact again. Admiral Yates answered on the third ping. The old man's face appeared on Frank's portable screen, weathered and gray but still sharp around the eyes. 20 years since they had served together. 20 years since Frank had watched Yates send men to die for objectives that existed only on classified documents. "Holloway," Yates said, "I assumed you were dead. Working on it. I need decryption software. Military grade. The kind intelligence uses." Yates was quiet for a moment. "What did you find?" "I don't know yet. That's the problem." The software arrived through encrypted channels 6 hours later. Frank did not ask how Yates still had access to such things. Some questions were better left unasked. The first file opened like a wound, medical records. Hundreds of them. Each subject identified only by a number. Species listed clinically: Silurian, Vorath, Kelmari, human. Ages ranging from 6 years old to 42. Status for most of them: terminated. Frank had seen personnel files before. He had seen casualty reports and autopsy summaries. This was different. This was systematic. This was organized cruelty wearing the mask of science. The experiments focused on biological modification, gene splicing to enhance strength, neural rewiring to improve reflexes, attempts to create soldiers who could survive environments that would kill normal beings. The failure rate was 98%. Frank opened a video file. He should not have that a Silurian child lay strapped to a table. She could not have been more than 8 years old. Her scales were the soft green of youth, and her eyes were wide with terror. A human scientist in a white coat injected something into her arm. The child began to scream. Frank watched for 11 seconds before he turned away. The screaming continued for another 4 minutes before it stopped. When he looked back, the child was no longer moving. The scientist made notes on a tablet and called for the next subject. Frank walked outside and vomited into the red dust. He had killed 847 people in his career. Soldiers, combatants, targets who had signed up for war just as he had. He had never lost sleep over them. War was war. You killed or you died. This was something else. This was murder dressed as progress. He went back inside. He kept reading. The project was called Ascension. Its stated goal was to create enhanced operatives capable of surviving extreme conditions. Deep space, toxic atmospheres, high gravity. The scientists believed they could engineer the perfect soldier. Instead, they engineered suffering on an industrial scale. The funding records took another 2 days to decrypt. When Frank finally opened them, he felt something cold settle in his chest. Ascension had been jointly funded. Half the money came from the Terran Colonial Authority. The other half came from the Silurian High Council. Both governments, both species, working together to torture children in the name of military advantage. Frank copied everything to portable drives. He hid them in 3 different locations around the mesa. Under rocks, inside wall panels, buried in the dust. If someone came for him, the evidence would survive. He was halfway through another batch of files when his perimeter alarm triggered. The facility had old security systems that Frank had reactivated on his first week. Nothing fancy. Motion sensors and cameras. Enough to warn him if someone approached. Someone was approaching. He pulled up the external feed. A ship sat on the flat ground 2 kilometers away. Unmarked. No transponder signal. 6 figures moved toward the facility in a tactical spread. For humans, 2 Silurians. All armed. All moving like professionals. Frank recognized the formation. Cleanup crew. He had worked with teams like this before. Their job was simple: eliminate witnesses and destroy evidence. Someone had been watching the facility. Someone had noticed when Frank accessed the files. And someone had decided that the secrets of Ascension were worth killing to protect. Frank smiled grimly. They had sent 6 operators against 1 retired sniper. They should have sent more. He began preparing. Weapons checked and loaded. Sightlines identified. Choke points mapped. The facility was a fortress if you knew how to use it. Frank knew. His communicator buzzed. A message from an unknown source, broadcast on the facility's old frequency. Return the files. Walk away. This is your only chance. Frank keyed his response. Come and take them. He shut off the communicator and climbed to the upper level where a window overlooked the approach. The six figures were still advancing, confident in their numbers. They had no idea what was waiting for them. Frank settled into position and began to count his bullets. He had 19 rounds, .6 targets, .13 to spare. He exhaled slowly and placed his eye to the scope. The hunt was about to begin. The first operative died without knowing what hit him. Frank squeezed the trigger from 600 meters. The round crossed the distance in less than a second. The human point man dropped. His companions scattered instantly, diving for cover behind rocks and shallow depressions in the terrain. Professionals. They reacted well. But reaction was not enough against someone who had spent 30 years studying how people moved under fire. The second operative made the mistake of running toward a larger boulder. Running meant predictable motion. Frank led the target by half a meter and fired. Another body fell, .4 remaining. They had gone to ground now, invisible in the rocky landscape. Frank did not mind. He could wait. Snipers were patient creatures. For 3 hours, nothing moved. The twin suns crossed the sky and began their descent toward the horizon. Frank stayed motionless, breathing slowly, watching for any sign of movement. One of the Silurians made a break for it when the shadows grew long enough to provide cover. His scales shifted color, an instinctive camouflage response that might have worked against most predators. Frank was not most predators. The third shot took the Silurian in the chest. He fell and did not rise. After that, the remaining 3 retreated. They crawled backward through the dust for almost a kilometer before reaching their ship. Frank let them go. 3 enemies who knew they were outmatched were less dangerous than 3 enemies with nothing to lose. The ship lifted off and moved to a higher orbit. Waiting. Regrouping. Frank knew they would be back with reinforcements. He had perhaps 2 days to prepare. The news reached Red Basin by morning. Nira appeared at his entrance before noon, her eyes wide and her scales flushed dark with anger. "Everyone is talking about the gunfire yesterday," she said. 3 bodies in the desert. Who were they? People who wanted me dead. What? Frank considered lying. He considered telling her nothing. But she had family who had suffered in this place. She deserved to know that he showed her one video. Just one. The Silurian child on the table. Nira watched in silence. When the child began to scream, her hands trembled. When the child went still, Nira made a sound that was not quite a word. Something between grief and rage. "I know her face," Nira whispered. "That is my aunt. She disappeared 40 years ago. My grandmother searched for her until she died. We never knew what happened. Now you know." Nira turned to Frank with tears running down her scaled cheeks. "Who did this? Who is responsible?" "Both governments. Yours and mine. Together." The betrayal in her eyes was absolute. Her own council, her own leaders. They had fed children to scientists and buried the truth for decades. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "Fight. Expose everything. Make them answer for it. You cannot fight alone." Frank shrugged. "I've been alone most of my life. It's familiar. Then let me help. I know this land better than any human. I know people who will listen. My uncle was not the only one who worked here. There are others who have carried this secret without understanding it." Frank studied her for a long moment. She was young, probably 30 by human standards. Too young to throw her life away on an old soldier's war, but the fire in her eyes was real. The same fire he had seen in the best soldiers he ever commanded. You could not teach that kind of determination. You either had it or you did not. "If you help me," he said, "there's no going back. These people have killed to protect their secrets. They'll kill again." "Good," Nira said. "Let them try." They spent the next day preparing. Nira scavenged parts from junkyards and abandoned equipment. Frank assembled weapons from components that should not have fit together. They mapped escape routes and identified defensible positions throughout the facility. On the second night, Director Pel Orvin was found dead in his office. Official cause: suicide. A single shot to the head with his own weapon. Frank knew better. Orvin had sold him the facility. Orvin knew the property's history. Someone had decided he was a loose end. The message was clear. Anyone connected to this place would be eliminated. Frank sat in the darkness of his facility and thought about what came next. He had evidence of monstrous crimes. He had enemies with unlimited resources. He had one ally and a building full of ghosts. The odds were not good, but Frank Holloway had never fought because the odds were good. He fought because some things were worth fighting for, regardless of cost. 847 lives he had taken. Perhaps now he could balance that ledger by saving others. He loaded his rifle and waited for the dawn. Somewhere in the darkness above Dustfall, ships were gathering. The Syndicate was sending everything they had. 20 operators. Full tactical support. Orders to leave no witnesses. Frank did not know their numbers yet. He only knew they were coming, and he would be ready. Killing the tactical team would buy time. It would not solve the problem. As long as the Syndicate controlled the story, they would simply send more hunters until Frank and everyone who helped him was dead. The only way to win was to make the truth impossible to bury. Frank contacted Admiral Yates again. This time, he sent files along with his message. Not everything, just enough to prove what Ascension had been. Medical records, funding documents, 3 video clips carefully chosen for maximum impact. Spread it, Frank said. Every journalist you trust, every politician who isn't compromised, every alien rights organization that will listen. Make it go everywhere at once. Yates looked older than he had during their last conversation. The files had aged him. If I do this, neither of us can take it back. The people who funded this project will burn entire worlds to keep it quiet. Then they'll have to burn a lot of worlds. That's the point. The leaks began 48 hours later that a journalist on the colony world of New Brisbane received an anonymous package. A Silurian rights group on the homeworld found encrypted files in their secure server. 3 members of the Terran Colonial Parliament discovered documents waiting in their personal accounts. Within a week, the story was everywhere. The reaction was immediate and violent. Silurian colonies erupted in protests that became riots. Citizens demanded answers from their High Council. How many children had disappeared into government facilities? How many families had been told their loved ones died in accidents or ran away? Human colonies were no better. Parents who had lost children decades ago now wondered if their grief had been manufactured. Veterans who had served the colonial authority questioned everything they had fought for. The Syndicate's carefully maintained silence crumbled under the weight of public fury, but desperation made dangerous enemies. Frank received a warning from Yates. Encrypted. Urgent. Full tactical team deployed. 20 operators. Heavy weapons. They're coming to end this permanently. 20 against 2. Even with the facility's defenses, those numbers meant death. Nira had a different idea. My uncle was not the only one who worked here, she said. There were guards, maintenance workers, drivers who transported supplies. Some are still alive. Most have families who lost someone to this place. You want to recruit them? I want to give them the chance to fight for their dead. She met Frank's eyes with that fierce determination he had come to respect. You humans are not the only species that values justice. She left before dawn and returned 3 days later with 12 Silurians. Old hunters, former soldiers, workers who had spent decades carrying guilt they could not name. They brought weapons ranging from military surplus rifles to homemade explosives. It was not an army, but it was something. Frank gathered them in the facility's main chamber. 12 pairs of reptilian eyes watched him with expressions he could not quite read. You know what this place was, he said. You know what was done here. The people who are coming want to bury it forever. They want to kill everyone who knows the truth and pretend Ascension never happened. He paused, letting the words settle. I'm not going to pretend this is a fair fight. There are 20 of them. Professional killers with the best equipment money can buy. Some of you will probably die. An older Silurian with scarred scales spoke up. My daughter was taken when she was 7. They told me she drowned in the river. I searched that river for a month. His voice cracked. I found nothing because there was nothing to find. She was here, in this building, dying on a table while scientists took notes. He straightened his spine. I am not afraid of death. I am afraid of dying without making them pay. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the group. Frank nodded slowly. Then let's make them pay. They spent the remaining time fortifying. Trip wires across the approaches. Explosive charges in the tunnels below. Overlapping fields of fire from every defensible position. Frank taught them what he knew about ambush tactics and fighting from prepared positions. That on the night before the attack, he recorded a message. He sat in front of a camera and spoke clearly, naming every official in the funding documents, explaining the experiments in plain language, describing what he had seen in the video files. That he sent the recording to Yates with instructions to release it in 48 hours if Frank did not cancel the transmission. The truth would survive even if he did not. Dawn came slowly over Dustfall. The twin suns painted the mesa in shades of orange and red. Frank stood at his observation post and watched the horizon through his scope. They came out of the sunrise. 20 figures in tactical gear, spreading across the terrain like a dark wave. They had vehicles, heavy weapons, every advantage that money and organization could provide. Frank counted them carefully. 20 targets. He had 19 bullets in his rifle that he smiled that he had always enjoyed a challenge. The first shot echoed across the desert. The battle for Dustfall had begun. Frank's first shot took the team leader through the neck. The second shot killed the communications officer before he could call for support. The third and fourth dropped 2 more operatives who made the mistake of clustering near their vehicle. 4 down in 20 seconds. The remaining 16 scattered like insects fleeing a boot. The facility had been designed for defense. Thick walls, limited approach angles, underground tunnels that created perfect kill zones. Frank had spent days turning it into a nightmare for any attacking force. The Silurian volunteers held the lower positions. They were not soldiers, but they knew how to shoot and they knew these lands. When 3 operatives tried to flank through a dry riverbed, 2 Silurian hunters caught them in a crossfire. 6 more dead. 10 remaining. The tactical team's commander was smart. He pulled his people back and called for patience. They had numbers and resources. They could wait for the defenders to make mistakes, but waiting cost them. Every hour that passed meant more of Frank's evidence spreading across the galaxy. Every hour meant more questions from journalists and politicians. The syndicate needed this finished quickly. They tried the tunnels. Old maintenance passages ran beneath the facility, connecting to service access points throughout the mesa. The team commander sent 4 operators underground with cutting equipment to breach from below. Frank had anticipated this. He had mapped every tunnel during his first week. He knew exactly where charges would cause maximum collapse. The explosion buried the underground team beneath 1,000 tons of rock. No survivors. 6 operatives remaining. They were trapped now between Frank's fortified position and the armed Silurians blocking their retreat to the landing zone. The commander's voice came over the facility's old communication system. Tired. Frustrated. This is pointless. You can't win. Even if you kill all of us, more will come. The syndicate has resources you can't imagine. Frank keyed his response. Then they'd better send more men. You're running out. A long pause. What do you want? Justice. Trials. Every official who signed off on Ascension standing before a court. That will never happen. Then neither will your survival. The final assault came at dusk. 6 operatives, knowing they were dead anyway, charged the main entrance in a desperate attempt to breach the facility and destroy the evidence inside. 2 fell to Frank's rifle before they reached the walls. A Silurian hunter took a third with a hunting bow, an old weapon but deadly accurate at close range. The remaining 3 made it through the outer door. Frank met them in the corridor. Close quarters. No room for precision shooting. He killed one with a knife, another with a pistol shot at point-blank range. The last one put a round through Frank's shoulder before Nira appeared behind him and ended the fight with a piece of metal pipe. Silence fell over the facility. 20 operatives had come to bury the truth. All 20 were dead. Frank leaned against the wall, pressing his hand against his bleeding shoulder. Not bad for a mechanic. Nira did not smile. We lost 3 of ours. Good people. Frank nodded. The cost of war was always measured in lives. He had learned that lesson decades ago. It never got easier to pay. He made his way down to the lowest level while Nira organized the survivors. The battle was won, but something had been nagging at him since he first discovered the files. A gap in the records. Numbers that did not add up. The video logs mentioned subject counts that exceeded the death records. Someone had survived. Someone was still missing. That he searched the laboratory level methodically, checking every sealed door, every storage room, every shadow. In a section he had overlooked before, hidden behind a false wall panel, he found a chamber he had never seen. Inside was a cryogenic pod. Still powered. Still functioning after all these years on backup systems. Through the frost-covered glass, Frank saw a face. A Silurian boy, perhaps 12 years old. His scales were pale from years without sunlight, but his vital signs blinked steadily on the pod's display. Subject 227. The only survivor of Project Ascension, Frank initiated the revival sequence. While the pod cycled through its awakening protocols, his communicator crackled with a new transmission. Not from Yates. Not from anyone he recognized. A cold voice, filtered through encryption. Impressive work, soldier. You've killed my entire ground team. You've spread my secrets across half the galaxy. You've become quite the problem. Frank found the source. The Syndicate ship in orbit. But every problem has a solution, the voice continued. I've requested authorization for orbital bombardment. Your little facility and everyone in it will be vapor within the hour. The evidence will be destroyed. The witnesses will be eliminated. And the official story will be that a madman attacked innocent government workers before being neutralized. Frank looked at the boy in the cryopod, at Nira and the surviving Silurians, at the files that proved what had happened in this place. 1 hour, the voice said. Say your prayers. The transmission ended. Frank closed his eyes. 1 hour. Not enough time to run. Not enough time to evacuate the evidence. Not enough time for anything except one final gamble. He opened a channel to Admiral Yates. I need a favor, he said. The biggest one I've ever asked. On the other end, Yates listened, and then he began making calls. 40 minutes until the orbital strike. Frank carried the Silurian boy out of the cryogenic chamber while Nira gathered the surviving defenders. The child was weak, disoriented, and terrified. He had gone to sleep in a nightmare and woken up surrounded by strangers. You are safe, Frank told him. The words felt strange in his mouth. He had spent his life ending lives, not protecting them. No one will hurt you again. The boy's eyes were large and dark, filled with memories no child should carry. He did not speak. Perhaps he had forgotten how 30 minutes. Frank positioned everyone in the lowest levels of the facility, where the rock might provide some protection against the bombardment. He knew it was futile. Orbital weapons could crack planets. A mesa was nothing, but he refused to stand in the open and wait for death. 20 minutes. His communicator buzzed. Admiral Yates, voice tight with exhaustion. I called in every favor I had left. Every contact. Every old friend who still believes in something bigger than politics. And, look up. Frank climbed to the surface and stared at the sky. A ship dropped out of faster-than-light travel directly above Dustfall. A Terran Navy destroyer, old but well-maintained, its hull bearing the name Resolute. It positioned itself between the planet and the Syndicate vessel. This is Captain and Shelby of the Terran Navy, a woman's voice broadcast on all channels. Any orbital strike on this world will be considered an act of war against the Terran Colonial Authority. You have one chance to stand down. The Syndicate ship did not move. 15 minutes. 2 more ships emerged from FTL. Silurian military vessels, their organic hulls gleaming in the sunlight. They flanked the Resolute, forming a wall of protection around Dustfall. This is Commander Vel of the Silurian Defense Fleet, a new voice announced. We are here at the request of High Council members who have seen the evidence of Project Ascension. Stand down or face consequences. Silence on all channels. Frank held his breath. 3 ships against 1. But the Syndicate had connections everywhere. They had survived decades by controlling people in power. One word from the right official, and those defending ships could become enemies. 10 minutes. The Syndicate vessel powered up its weapons systems. For a moment, Frank thought they would fire anyway, destroy the evidence, and accept the consequences. Then the ship turned. Its engines flared, and it retreated into FTL, vanishing from the system in a flash of distorted light. Frank sat down heavily on a rock. His shoulder throbbed. His body ached. But he was alive. They all were. Nira found him there an hour later, still staring at the sky. The Silurian boy sat beside her, holding her hand. It is over? She asked. This part is over. The trials will take years. Some of the people responsible will escape justice. Others will make deals to save themselves. He shook his head. That's how it always works. The powerful protect each other. But some will pay. Yes, some will pay. The trials lasted 18 months. 17 officials were convicted of crimes against sentient beings. The Terran Colonial Authority issued formal apologies and reparations. The Silurian High Council dissolved its intelligence division entirely. The facility on Dustfall was demolished. In its place, they built a memorial. A simple stone structure with the names of every victim etched into its walls. Subject numbers had been matched to real identities. Children had been returned to their families, if only as memories. Frank did not attend the dedication ceremony. He was already gone, back to the frontier, looking for another quiet place where he could disappear, but the frontier found him. Nira tracked him down 3 months after the trials ended. She brought the boy, who had a name now. Darren. He had been adopted into her family. He was learning to speak again, slowly. Learning to trust. They sat on the porch of Frank's small cabin and watched the sunset. 3 people with nothing in common except survival. "Why did you fight for us?" Darren asked. His voice was soft, uncertain. "You did not know us." Frank thought about the question. 847 lives he had taken. Soldiers and enemies, and people who were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. He had followed orders for 30 years without asking who benefited. "Because someone had to," he said finally. "And I was there." Darren seemed to accept this. He leaned against Nira and watched the colors fade from the sky. Later that night, a message arrived on Frank's terminal. Encrypted, anonymous, but he recognized the routing codes. Admiral Yates. The message contained coordinates. A moon on the edge of explored space. Another abandoned facility. Another cache of buried files. Frank read it twice. Then he looked at Nira, who had seen the glow of the screen and come to investigate. "More secrets," he said. She studied his face. "You want to go?" "I have to go. If there are more facilities like Ascension, more people suffering in the dark, someone needs to find them." Nira nodded slowly. "Then I am coming with you. It will be dangerous. Everything worth doing is dangerous." Frank almost smiled. He had spent his life alone, isolated by choice, protected by distance from anything that might make him feel, but some walls were meant to fall. "Pack light," he said. "We leave at dawn." Outside, the stars burned cold and endless. Somewhere among them, more secrets waited. More evil hiding behind official seals and classified stamps. Frank Holloway had been a weapon once. A tool for others to use. Now he was something else. Something better, and his war was just beginning.